You ever drive past a house so bright it nearly burns your retinas? Well, that's my house now. And believe it or not, it all started because my HOA's very own self-appointed queen, Karen, decided my perfectly fine beige siding wasn't up to community standards. She handed me a violation notice, like she was delivering a royal decree. Repaint or pay the price, she said. Now I could have caved. I could have chosen one of the HOA's approved neutral tones, but instead I decided if they wanted me to repaint, I'd give them a color they'd never forget. What followed was a battle of wills, a neighborhood spectacle, and the single most outrageous revenge paint job my subdivision has ever seen. So buckle up, because this isn't just a story about paint, it's about power control and what happens when you push the wrong neighbor too far. But before we dive in, let me know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now in your part of the world? I'd always considered myself a man who could blend in. Not flashy, not dull, just the middle lane of life. My house was painted beige, the safest color on God's palette. Beige is Switzerland in paint form. Neutral. Forgettable. The kind of shade you don't even notice because it doesn't offend anyone. At least that's what I thought. But then came the letter. It was folded in 3 neat creases, slipped under my doormat like contraband. HOA letterhead at the top, Karen's heavy perfume still clinging to the paper. The words were bold, capitalized, and dripping with passive-aggressive authority. Your house color is no longer in compliance with community guidelines. You are hereby ordered to repaint within 30 days or face fines up to $250 per week. Now, if you've never lived under an HOA dictatorship, let me tell you, these people take themselves more seriously than the Supreme Court. Karen, the reigning monarch of our HOA board, strutted around like she was Judge Judy, Martha, Stewart, and Napoleon rolled into one, and for some reason, repainting my beige house was her latest crusade. I sat on my porch, letter in hand, my German shepherd sprawled at my feet, and thought, really, this is the hill you want to die on, Karen Beige. Later that afternoon, as if the letter wasn't enough, Karen herself showed up. I could hear her heels clicking against the pavement before she even reached my driveway. She was dressed in her usual pastel cardigan today. It was mint green, her pearl necklace glowing like a string of authority beads. She held a clipboard, of course, the HOA's version of a sword. "Hello, David," she said, stretching my name like she was testing its elasticity. "Have you seen the notice?" I waved the paper at her. "Oh, you mean this love letter? Yes, quite romantic." Her lips pursed so tight you could have sealed an envelope with them. "It's not optional. Our neighborhood has standards, and your siding looks tired." "Tired," I echoed. "Karen, it's beige. Beige doesn't get tired. Beige is eternal." She wasn't amused. "The board has approved a list of acceptable colors, and I expect you to choose one by the end of the week." That's when I noticed the way she glanced at my neighbors' houses. A couple of them were peeking from behind their curtains, enjoying the free theater. This wasn't just about me. This was about Karen putting on a show, making an example. "Tell you what," I said, smiling. "I'll give it some thought." Her eyes narrowed. "Think quickly." And with that, she marched back to her car, slammed the door hard enough to rattle the mailbox, and sped off like she'd just delivered a warrant. I sat there for a long while, chewing on the sheer absurdity of it. My house was fine. My siding was fine. The only thing out of compliance was Karen's need for control. Still, I knew better than to underestimate her. Karen wasn't just annoying, she was relentless. The next day, I started noticing little signs of her campaign. A yellow sticky note tucked under my windshield wiper, house color, still unresolved. "Don't forget the deadline," another anonymous flyer in my mailbox about how non-compliant homes lower property values. And then the kicker, she brought it up at the HOA board meeting. Now, I normally avoided those gatherings like the plague. But word spread fast that Karen had mentioned my house in front of everyone, so I had to hear it for myself. I slipped into the folding chair in the back of the community clubhouse, arms crossed, watching the circus unfold. Karen stood at the front with her clipboard pointing to a PowerPoint slide titled Community, Image and Aesthetics. And there it was, my house photographed from 3 different angles projected on the big screen like a criminal mugshot. "This," she declared, tapping the pointer against the photo, "is what happens when we let things slide. A once proud beige has faded into a dull gray, dragging down the visual harmony of our neighborhood. We cannot allow this." I raised my hand. For the record, my house is beige. Still beige. Always beige. If you squint hard enough, you might call it oatmeal, but definitely not gray. A few neighbors chuckled. Karen's nostrils flared. "This is not a joke, David. The board agrees your house must be repainted." Now here's the thing. Not every neighbor hated me. Some were just too afraid of Karen to speak up. But I caught the smirk on my buddy Rick's face, the guy 3 doors down. He whispered loud enough for a few rows to hear. Man, if beige is a crime, half of us are going to jail. That earned another round of chuckles. Karen slammed her pointer down. Enough. We will not tolerate defiance. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about paint. This was about control. About Karen flexing her power in front of the community. About turning a minor detail into a public spectacle so she could tighten her grip. I left that meeting with my mind racing. Part of me wanted to cave just to end the nonsense. But another part of me, call it stubbornness, call it pride, call it the sheer joy of poking the bear, decided right then and there that if I was going to repaint, I wasn't going to repaint beige, or taupe, or any of the other 37 shades of depression on Karen's approved list. No, if she wanted a new color, I'd give her one she'd never forget. As I pulled into my driveway that night, headlights washing over the beige siding Karen hated so much I pictured it in neon. Glorious retina-burning neon. And for the first time since that ridiculous letter showed up, I actually smiled. The battle had just begun. If there's one thing I've learned about Karen, it's that she doesn't believe in dropping it. When she decides you're her personal project, she'll chase you down like a mall security guard with something to prove. And after the meeting humiliation, I knew I had painted a giant target on my back. It started with the letters. Not just one or two. No, Karen launched a full-scale postal assault. Every other day I'd find an envelope with the HOA logo stamped across the top. Each one carried a new official violation notice, neatly typed in bureaucratic jargon, reminding me of my looming 30-day deadline. Failure to comply will result in escalating fines. Community aesthetics must be preserved at all costs. Your neighbors are watching. That last line actually made me laugh. Your neighbors are watching. What was this? A Cold War spy movie? Was Karen going to hand out binoculars at the next board meeting and assign shifts? Still, I could feel the pressure tightening. One morning, I found a bright orange warning tag taped to my garage door, big bold letters screaming, "Final Notice." The absurdity of it almost made me choke on my coffee. My house wasn't falling apart. It wasn't infested with termites or growing mold colonies the size of Kansas. It was beige. Boring, safe, non-threatening beige. But to Karen, beige had become a weapon of mass destruction. And it wasn't just paper anymore. Karen started her whisper campaign. I'd be mowing the lawn when I'd catch two neighbors murmuring by the sidewalk, eyes darting between me and my house. At the mailbox, I overheard one woman telling another that my siding was a disgrace and dragging down everyone's property values. Funny thing is, those same neighbors were always friendly before. They'd wave, ask about my dog, sometimes even borrow tools. But now they acted like my beige house was radioactive, and anyone who stood too close would lose equity points. I knew exactly where it came from. Karen was planting seeds of discontent, watering them with gossip, until half the block was buzzing with her narrative. The next HOA board meeting was practically a roast. Karen opened the session by announcing, "We must address the ongoing non-compliance of one particular residence." And like a magician pulling a rabbit from a hat, she once again threw my house photo on the projector. "This eyesore," she said, tapping her pointer, like she was sentencing me to death, represents a slippery slope. If we allow one person to flout the rules soon, the neighborhood will spiral into chaos. What's next? Purple houses, polka dots. From the back row, I muttered, "Don't tempt me." A couple of neighbors snorted, trying to hide their laughter. Karen's head whipped around like an owl spotting prey. "Excuse me," she demanded. I shrugged. "Just saying purple has a nice vibe. Regal, bold." Her eyes narrowed into daggers. "This is not a joke, David." But here's the thing, it was a joke, at least to me. Because the more she tried to tighten her grip, the more ridiculous it all became. And the more ridiculous it got, the less power she actually held over me. Still, I wasn't blind. Not everyone in the room was laughing. Some neighbors were nodding along, clearly buying into her community harmony speech. A few even piped up. "I think Karen's right," said one man with the posture of a hall monitor. "We can't let things slide, or soon it'll affect resale values." Another added, "I don't want my kids growing up in a neighborhood where people just ignore the rules." That last one nearly made me fall out of my chair. Ignore the rules. This wasn't Grand Theft Auto. This was house paint. But I also noticed something else, glimmers of quiet rebellion. My buddy Rick, sitting 2 rows up, leaned back and muttered, "Man, if Karen keeps this up, I might paint my place polka dots just to spite her." I smiled. Resistance was brewing, even if it was silent. Outside of meetings, Karen's tactics grew pettier. She started walking her little poodle Daisy past my house 3 times a day, always stopping just long enough to snap a progress photo with her phone. Sometimes she'd even stand there, hands on hips, glaring at my siding as though her sheer disapproval could bleach it into compliance. One Saturday morning, as I was trimming hedges, she marched up with her clipboard again. "David," she said, tapping her pen, "we've given you ample time, and yet you've made no effort to select a compliant color." I wiped sweat off my forehead. "I'm still considering my options." "Consider faster." I leaned on my rake. "Tell me, Karen, if I picked, say, bright yellow, would that be acceptable?" She recoiled like I'd suggested graffiti. "Absolutely not. The approved palette is neutral earth tones only." "Ah," I said, "so basically 50 shades of beige." Her nostrils flared. "Don't be smart." "Too late," I grinned. She stormed off, muttering something about fines. But here's the truth. Every new threat, every new violation notice, every new gossip campaign just made me more determined. I wasn't going to let Karen bully me into submission. If she wanted a fight, I'd give her one, but on my terms. What she didn't know was that I'd already started doing research. Quietly, methodically. At night, I sat at my computer, scrolling through paint company websites, looking not at the neutrals, but at the most outrageous colors available. Neon yellow, fluorescent lime, blinding turquoise. Colors so bright they made your pupils beg for mercy. I even ordered swatches. They arrived in a little envelope, dozens of tiny squares that I taped to my wall like trophies. My dog would tilt his head squinting at the glowing neon samples, and I'd say, "What do you think, buddy? Too much." He'd just wag his tail, which I took as a green light, pun intended. The more Karen pushed, the more swatches I collected. And the more swatches I collected, the clearer my plan became. This wasn't just about compliance anymore. This was about making a point. If the HOA wanted me to repaint, I'd repaint. But I'd do it in such a way that Karen would regret ever picking this fight. I imagined the day vividly, the paint cans being cracked open, the brushes dripping with neon, the siding transforming from safe beige into a blinding beacon of rebellion. I could already see the look on Karen's face, her jaw hitting the pavement, her clipboard clattering to the ground. And just like that, the fear of her fines and threats melted away. Because suddenly, the power had shifted. She thought she was pushing me into a corner, but really she was handing me the paintbrush of revenge. And oh, I intended to use it. By the time the third week of Karen's harassment campaign rolled around, I'd stopped being angry and started being inspired. See, anger burns hot and fast, it'll consume you if you let it. But inspiration, that's a different beast. That's what makes you sit back with a cold beer in hand, stare at your beige siding and think, how can I turn this into the most entertaining disaster possible? I wasn't just going to repaint my house. I was going to turn it into a monument, a glowing, retina-searing, migraine-inducing symbol of defiance. The first step was research. And trust me, I dove deep. Most people think choosing paint is as simple as going to Home Depot, grabbing a few swatches, and arguing with your spouse in the aisle until one of you caves. But oh no, my friends, paint is science, it's chemistry, it's war. I learned that brightness is measured in something called LRV, light reflectance value. Basically, it tells you how much light a color reflects. Karen's beloved beige, somewhere in the 50 seconds, middle of the road, forget table, safe. But the colors I started eyeing, they were up in the 80 seconds and 90 seconds. The kind of shades that could probably be seen from space. Neon yellows with names like solar flare, lime greens called electric surge. Oranges so bright they came with warning labels. I ordered sample cans, tiny little pots of chaos, and spent nights painting test patches on scrap wood in my garage. When I set them under a floodlight, the glow was otherworldly. My garage looked like a rave party. One evening, Rick wandered over with a beer. He saw the glowing panels lined up like radioactive artifacts and just about spit out his drink. "Good God, man," he laughed. "Are you trying to land planes in your driveway?" Maybe, I said, grinning. "Depends how much Karen screams." Rick slapped me on the back. "I'll chip in for the paint if it means watching her explode." That's when I realized this wasn't just my battle. It was neighborhood theater. A rebellion with an audience. People were tired of Karen's power trips. They might not have had the guts to defy her outright, but they were more than happy to watch me take the punches on their behalf. Step 2 of my plan was logistics. Painting a house isn't a weekend project with a roller brush. You need manpower, equipment, scaffolding, and most importantly, the element of surprise. I made a few calls, hired a local crew, and swore them to secrecy. The guys thought it was hilarious when I showed them the swatch I'd chosen. "You serious?" the foreman asked, eyebrows climbing. "Dead serious," I said. "And if you finish it in 2 days, there's a bonus." He shook his head, chuckling. "All right, boss, but don't blame me when planes mistake your house for a runway." Step 3, timing. Karen was nosy, but she couldn't be everywhere at once. I wanted the reveal to hit her like a sucker punch. So I scheduled the crew for early Friday morning when she'd be at her weekly yoga and latte session with her HOA cronies. That gave us a good 6-hour head start before she inevitably swooped in like a hawk. Now I know what you're thinking. David, weren't you worried she'd fine you into oblivion? And the answer is no, because I'd done my homework. See, Karen kept waving that approved colors list like it was the 10 Commandments. But when I actually read the HOA bylaws, I noticed something crucial. Nowhere did it say I had to pick from the list. The bylaws only stated that homes must be painted in a single uniform solid color. No patterns, no murals, no stripes. But color choice, wide open. That was my loophole. I called a lawyer buddy just to be safe, sent him the documents. He called me back laughing so hard he could barely speak. David, he said, they screwed up. Your HOA's bylaws are a mess. Legally, you could paint that house hot pink and they couldn't do squat. Good, I replied, because I've got something brighter in mind. The week leading up to paint day was delicious. Every time Karen passed my house glaring at the beige she hated, I smiled knowing what was coming. It was like holding a firework before the fuse caught pure anticipation. I even toyed with the idea of leaving her little hints. One night, I propped one of my neon test boards against the porch, angled just enough that headlights lit it up like a glowing sign. The next morning it was gone. Stolen. Rick smirked when I told him. Karen probably burned it in her fireplace. You're living rent-free in her head. Good. That was the plan. The night before, I barely slept. I kept pacing, imagining her face. Would she faint? Would she shriek? Would her pearls snap right off her neck like in a cartoon? My dog followed me around wagging like he knew we were about to commit glorious chaos. Friday dawned bright and cloudless, the perfect canvas. The crew showed up with ladders, rollers, and industrial buckets of the brightest neon yellow mankind had ever created. The cans literally had safety warnings about eye fatigue. That's when I knew I'd chosen well. As the first strokes went up, the beige disappeared under a blinding wave of sunshine. It was dazzling, radioactive, alive. And I hadn't even seen Karen yet. But I knew she was about to. Because this wasn't just a paint job. This was revenge. And the stage was set for the show of a lifetime. Friday morning came with the kind of sunshine that makes you suspicious. Too perfect, too calm, like the world was holding its breath before the storm. At 7:00 a.m., sharp the painting crew rolled into my driveway. 2 trucks, 6 guys, ladders, rollers, and enough buckets of neon yellow to make the sun jealous. The foreman, a burly man named Mike, gave me a look as he unloaded. You sure about this? He asked. I grinned. Oh, I'm sure. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. By 7:30, the first roller hit the siding. Beige began to vanish under waves of glowing yellow. It was like watching my house shed its old skin, transforming into a radioactive phoenix. Neighbors noticed almost immediately. Curtains twitched. Garage doors creaked open. By 8:00, we had an audience forming across the street, moms with strollers, joggers slowing down, even old Mr. Jenkins dragging his lawn chair to the curb like it was Super Bowl Sunday. Rick naturally showed up with a cooler of beer. You're insane, he said, handing me a cold one. And I love it. I raised the can in a mock toast. To freedom. By 9:00, half the house was glowing. The color was so bright that one of the painters joked they needed sunglasses. My dog barked at the walls like he didn't recognize home anymore. Passing cars slowed to a crawl, drivers shielding their eyes. One delivery guy actually missed my mailbox because he was too busy staring. And then came the whispers. Oh my God, is he really doing that? That's illegal, right? Karen's going to have a stroke. Speaking of Karen, where was she? I checked my watch. 9:30. Any minute now. She always came back from yoga around 10 latte and hand self-righteous aura radiating for blocks. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. At exactly 10:07, her silver SUV turned onto the street. And let me tell you, if looks could kill, I would have been vaporized on the spot. She slammed on the brakes so hard, Daisy, her poodle, smacked against the passenger seat. Karen leapt out, latte in one hand, HOA clipboard in the other. She froze on the sidewalk, mouth hanging open. For a solid 10 seconds, she didn't speak, just stared. Then, like a kettle reaching boil, she erupted. What is this? She screamed, waving her arms like she was directing traffic. What is this? Mike, the foreman, didn't miss a beat. He dipped his roller and said casually, It's paint, ma'am. The crowd laughed. Someone clapped. Karen stomped up my driveway, nearly tripping over a paint can. You can't do this. This is not allowed. I stepped off the porch, arms spread like a showman. "Ah, Karen, you said repaint, so I repainted. Solid color, no patterns, just as the bylaws state." Her face turned the same shade as a ripe tomato. "This is a travesty, a crime against aesthetics." "Not according to Section 14, subsection C," I said, pulling a folded copy of the HOA bylaws from my pocket. I'd been waiting for this moment. "See, single uniform solid color. Doesn't say which color. Doesn't even mention brightness." Karen snatched the paper, skimmed it, and I swear I saw the exact second she realized I was right. Her lips trembled, but no words came out. The neighbors erupted into laughter. Rick actually fell off his cooler, rolling in the grass. Even Mr. Jenkins gave a slow clap, muttering, "About time someone stuck it to her." Karen tried to recover. She jabbed a finger toward the crew. "Stop immediately. This is an unauthorized alteration." Mike shrugged. "I've got a signed contract. We stop when the job's done. Then you'll all be fined," she screeched. One of the painters muttered, "Lady, I don't even live here." More laughter. By noon, the entire house gleamed like a giant highlighter pen. Birds circled overhead, confused. My mailbox looked like it was glowing in the reflection. The UPS guy came by, squinted, and said, "Man, I could see this place from 3 streets over." Kids on bikes stopped to take pictures. A group of teenagers posed for selfies in front of my driveway. Someone even yelled, "Yo, this is TikTok material," and started filming. Karen was losing her mind. She paced the sidewalk, clutching her clipboard like a life raft, calling someone on her phone, probably the rest of the board. By 1:00, her backup arrived. 2 other HOA members, both wearing the same look of shock and dismay. They huddled with Karen, whispering furiously, throwing me the occasional glare. I just sat on my porch with another beer, watching my house shine like a second Sunday. Finally, Karen marched back over, flanked by her cronies. "This is not over, David," she hissed. "The board will convene an emergency session. You will be punished." I smiled, raising my can. "Good luck. Bring sunglasses." The crew packed up by 3:00, job complete. The transformation was breathtaking, if by breathtaking you mean searing to the eyeballs. My once beige house now glowed so brightly it cast a yellow hue onto the sidewalk. Even my dog seemed impressed, tilting his head like he was admiring modern art. That evening, as the sun set, something magical happened. The neon yellow didn't dim, it amplified. Under the golden light, my house looked radioactive, like Chernobyl chic. Cars slowed down just to stare. People took photos. Word spread quickly. By nightfall, I'd achieved something I never expected. My house had become a landmark. Karen, meanwhile, was nowhere to be seen. Probably curled up in her living room, muttering to Daisy about bylaws and betrayal. And me, I sat on my porch, glowing house behind me, beer in hand, knowing deep in my bones that the real show was only just beginning. Because if Karen was furious now, wait until she saw what happened next. The day after my house was reborn into its neon glory, the neighborhood woke up to a different world. You could feel it the moment the sun hit my siding. Rays bounced off in blinding waves, ricocheting across driveways and into bedroom windows. I later found out 3 families had to buy blackout curtains overnight just to sleep past sunrise. But that wasn't the funny part. The funny part was how quickly the neighborhood gossip chain exploded. By 9:00 a.m., photos of my house were already circulating in the community Facebook group. By 10:00, people were joking about needing SPF 100 to walk past my yard. By noon, I heard rumors that local teenagers had nicknamed it the Lighthouse. And Karen, oh, Karen was seething. At 11:00 sharp, she staged a press conference on my front sidewalk. Okay, not technically a press conference, but she showed up with 2 board members, a stack of violation notices, and her pearl necklace rattling with rage. "This house," she announced loudly enough for half the block to hear, "is a blight on our community. A complete disregard for rules, harmony, and decency." I leaned against my porch railing, sipping coffee, enjoying the free theater. "Decency, Karen, it's a paint color, not a crime spree." "Don't be smug," she snapped. "The board will fine you into bankruptcy." "Oh, you mean the same board whose bylaws I already read, the ones that don't specify a color requirement? Yeah, good luck with that." The crowd that had gathered, neighbors, curious passers-by, even a delivery guy on break, laughed. Karen's face turned crimson. But she wasn't done. Karen never quits. That afternoon, she called an emergency HOA meeting. I didn't even have to guess what the agenda was. It was printed in bold on the flyer shoved into everyone's mailbox. Agenda discussing the nuisance of House #47. Yes, my house had become an official nuisance. The meeting that night was standing room only. Word had spread beyond the neighborhood. People from other subdivisions showed up just to see the chaos. Some brought popcorn. Literally. Karen stood at the front of the clubhouse like a general preparing for war. Behind her was a blown-up photo of my house taken at sunset, glowing like molten lava. This, she declared, pointer, tapping the screen, is destroying property values. Children are traumatized. Seniors can't drive safely down the street. The glare is a hazard. I raised my hand. Karen, I checked. No accidents have been reported. The only trauma I see is yours. Gasps. Laughter. Someone whispered savage. Karen's voice cracked with fury. You're mocking this board, David. You think this is funny. Absolutely, I said. Funniest thing I've seen in years. The room erupted. Half the people laughed, the other half clapped, and a small handful of Karen's loyalists shook their heads, muttering about decorum. Rick, bless him, stood up and shouted, "Leave the man alone, he followed the rules. If you don't like the rules, change them." That struck a chord. Suddenly, murmurs filled the room. People began questioning why the HOA was so obsessed with controlling every detail. Someone else pointed out how ridiculous it was to spend hours debating house paint when potholes in the street had gone unfixed for months. Karen banged her gavel like a judge losing control of the courtroom. Order, order, we cannot allow anarchy. But she'd lost them. For the first time in years, her iron grip on the neighborhood was slipping, and that terrified her. The next morning, I caught her snapping photos of my house again, muttering about city codes. Sure enough, by lunchtime, a city inspector showed up, clipboard in hand, official seal on his shirt. Karen trailed behind him like a lawyer dragging her star witness. "Good afternoon," the inspector said, shading his eyes as he looked up at my house. "I got a complaint about, brightness." "Brightness," I repeated, trying not to laugh. Karen shoved forward. "Yes, look at it. It's blinding. It's disruptive. Surely there's a city ordinance against this." The inspector squinted, pulled out a light meter, and took a few readings. He scribbled something on his clipboard, then shrugged. "Ma'am, there's no law against bright paint. Building's up to code. No violations here." Karen's face fell so hard I thought her pearls might snap. "What do you mean, no violations? Look at it." "I am the inspector," said flatly. "It's hideous, but legal." And just like that, he drove away. I don't think Karen had ever been so humiliated. Not only had her own HOA rules failed her, but now the city itself had confirmed she had no power. But humiliation didn't slow her down, it fueled her. Over the next week, she doubled her efforts. She wrote letters to the county, to the zoning board, even to the fire department, claiming my house posed a reflective hazard. She went door to door, begging neighbors to sign a petition for visual relief. Meanwhile, my house kept gaining fame. Strangers drove by just to take photos. Local news even picked it up, running a short segment titled "The Brightest House in the Suburbs." Reporters called it a bold act of homeowner expression. Teenagers called it lit. My mailbox filled with letters from people I'd never met thanking me for standing up to HOA tyranny. And my favorite, a letter from a man in Florida who wrote, "I painted my house purple after my HOA tried to bully me. You're my hero." For once, I wasn't the villain in the neighborhood story. I was the folk hero. The underdog who fought the HOA and won. Karen hated it. She stormed around like a dictator who'd lost her army. The tighter she tried to squeeze, the more people slipped through her fingers. At the next board meeting, when she tried to push for a new rule banning excessively bright colors, the crowd turned on her. One man shouted, "We're tired of you controlling everything." Another woman added, "Maybe you should resign if you can't handle dissent." Karen's eyes darted around the room, searching for support, but her cronies were shrinking into their seats. Even Daisy, her loyal poodle, looked bored. And me, I just leaned back, arms crossed, grinning like the cat who'd swallowed the canary. Because for once, Karen wasn't in charge. And the fallout was only just beginning. By the time the next HOA meeting rolled around, the tension in our neighborhood was thick enough to spread on toast. You could practically hear the hum of anticipation. Everyone knew Karen was gunning for me, and everyone knew I wasn't backing down. It was the kind of setup you'd expect in a courtroom drama, except instead of life sentences, the stakes were house paint. The clubhouse was packed that evening. Not just residents, people from outside the neighborhood had heard about the Lighthouse House and wanted a front row seat. Folding chairs lined the walls. Folks leaned against door frames. A local news crew even set up a tripod in the back. And there I was, sitting in the middle, arms crossed, a smug grin plastered on my face. Karen stormed in like a general marching to battle, pearls shining under the fluorescent lights, clipboard clutched like a weapon. Her cronies followed, though they looked more nervous than loyal. She slammed her gavel down. "This emergency session of the Homeowners Association is now in order. Tonight we address the flagrant violation and public nuisance caused by House #47. Every eye turned to me. I gave a little wave. "Evening, everyone." Karen's nostrils flared. David, your so-called paint job has disrupted the peace and aesthetic of this community. Children are afraid. Drivers are distracted. Property values are plummeting. Got any numbers on that? I asked, leaning back. Because Zillow tells me my house is worth more this week than last. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Karen banged her gavel again. Silence. This is no laughing matter. The room quieted, but you could feel the crowd slipping out of her control. She turned to the board. We must vote tonight to issue maximum fines and demand immediate repainting. I stood up, pulling a thick folder from under my chair. Before you do that, let's review a little something called the bylaws. I opened the folder dramatically, letting papers flutter like I was dealing cards. Article 14, subsection C, homes must be painted in a single uniform solid color. Check. Article 15, no murals, designs, or patterns. Check. Article 16, maintenance must be up to code. Guess what city inspector already confirmed? Check. I slapped the folder shut. So Karen, tell me, where exactly have I violated anything? The room buzzed, heads nodded. Even a few of her cronies shuffled uncomfortably. Karen's face went redder than a stop sign. It's a matter of interpretation, she shouted. Interpretation? I raised an eyebrow. Lady, this isn't modern art. Either it's in the rules or it isn't. And it isn't. Rick stood up in the back. He's right, you've been bullying this neighborhood for years. Enough's enough. The crowd erupted into applause. People who'd been silent before started speaking up. Yeah, I'm sick of all the fines. She tried to write me up for a garden gnome. She told me my curtains were the wrong shade of blue. It was like a dam breaking. Years of pent-up frustration poured out, all aimed squarely at Karen. She banged her gavel furiously. Order, order, I said, but the gavel wasn't saving her tonight. One man from the front row stood up. We should vote on this. Not just about his house, about her. Gasps filled the room. Karen froze, eyes wide. What do you mean? The man crossed his arms. A vote of no confidence. You've abused your power long enough. The room roared with agreement. Even some of her allies nodded reluctantly. Karen stammered. You can't do this. I'm the president of this HOA. Not if we vote you out, someone yelled. The board members exchanged nervous glances. Finally, one of them, a soft-spoken woman named Linda, cleared her throat. Maybe it's time for new leadership. Karen's mouth dropped open. She looked betrayed, horrified, desperate. Linda, you can't possibly. But Linda didn't meet her eyes. The vote happened right then and there. Hands shot up across the room. One after another, neighbors raised their arms calling for Karen's removal. The tally wasn't even close. Out of 42 members, only 4 supported her. Karen's jaw trembled. Her pearls rattled as she slammed her gavel one last time. This is a disgrace. You'll regret this. You're all sheep. Then she stormed out, Daisy the poodle trotting behind her leash, jangling like a death knell. The room erupted in cheers. People hugged. Rick lifted his beer can like a trophy. The news crew captured every second. And me, I just stood there, glowing house behind me, soaking in the victory. For once, the tyrant was gone. But the story wasn't just about my win. It was about the neighborhood finally standing up. And it all started because Karen couldn't leave well enough alone. As I walked home that night, neighbors patted me on the back, thanking me for sparking the rebellion. One woman laughed. You know, David, that house of yours might be ugly as sin, but it set us free. I grinned. Ugly never looked so good. Because that was the truth. My neon fortress wasn't just a middle finger to Karen, it was a beacon, a lighthouse literally and figuratively. Proof that you don't have to bow to petty tyrants. And though Karen was out of the picture, the glow of my revenge was just beginning to shine. When the dust finally settled after Karen's dramatic exit, the neighborhood felt like it had been hit by a thunderstorm that left behind clear skies. People walked their dogs with lighter steps. Neighbors who used to keep to themselves now waved at one another as if surviving Karen's reign together had turned us into allies. The power vacuum she left behind wasn't scary, it was liberating. But the most shocking part, my house had become a tourist attraction. I woke up one Saturday morning to find a line of cars creeping past drivers, slowing down to snap pictures. A group of teenagers stood on my lawn filming TikToks with my neon walls glowing in the background. Someone tagged me in a local news clip where a reporter called it the most talked about house in the county. At first I braced myself for backlash. Surely the fame would annoy the neighbors. But instead something unexpected happened. They embraced it. Parents joked with their kids, calling my place the lemon drop. Runners used it as a landmark in their routes. Meet me at the lighthouse house at 6 a.m. Real estate agents even started bragging in listings, walking distance from the neighborhood's famous viral house. I had accidentally increased property values, not lowered them. Irony at its finest. And me, I leaned into it. Why fight the joke when you can own it? I hung a small, solar-powered spotlight in the yard, aimed at the siding, so that at night the neon glow looked even brighter. Rick helped me set up lawn chairs on the porch so we could drink beer and watch people's reactions as they drove by, shielding their eyes and laughing. One evening, a young couple stopped by. They introduced themselves, said they'd just bought a house a few streets over, and admitted they moved here partly because they loved the story of my stand against the HOA. "You gave us hope," the wife said. "We figured if this neighborhood had the guts to vote out Karen, it must be a good place to raise kids." That hit me harder than I expected. What started as petty revenge had become a symbol of something bigger than neighborhood, choosing freedom over control. Of course, Karen didn't go quietly. She lingered in the shadows like a ghost of bureaucracy. Rumor had it, she tried to file lawsuits, but none of them stuck. She sent angry emails to the board demanding reinstatement, but they were ignored. Eventually, she moved out her silver SUV, vanishing one morning with Daisy in the passenger seat. No one waved goodbye. Life without Karen was calmer, but not boring. Every time I walked outside, I felt the warmth of solidarity from my neighbors. Even people who'd once sided with her stopped me to say, "You know you were right. We let her push us around too long." Funny how it works. One neon house had done what years of whispered complaints never could topple the tyrant. Still, I won't lie, the paint had its downsides. Birds sometimes smacked into the siding, confused by the glow. Delivery guys complained about migraines. My dog squinted when the afternoon sun bounced off the walls. And on hot days, the reflection made my driveway feel like standing on the surface of the sundae. But every inconvenience was worth it. Every squint, every joke, every TikTok video that called my place the acid trip house. Because at the end of the day, it wasn't just about the paint. It was about principle. About saying no when someone tries to micromanage your life over nonsense. So when people ask me if I'll ever repaint, I just laugh. Not until the sun burns out, I tell them, because sometimes the brightest revenge is the one that keeps shining. Looking back, I realized this whole fiasco wasn't really about house colors at all. It was about power and the choice to either surrender to it or push back. Karen believed control kept the neighborhood harmonious, but in truth, it only bred resentment. All it took was one ridiculous demand and one stubborn neighbor with a sense of humor to break her spell. And isn't that life in a nutshell? We're constantly faced with people who want to box us in, tell us how to act, how to look, how to live. Sometimes those rules are necessary, but sometimes they're just tools for someone else's ego. The trick is knowing the difference and having the courage to stand firm when the rules don't make sense. My neon house is ugly, no doubt about it. It blinds birds, annoys drivers, and probably lowers the resale value of sunglasses in a 10-mile radius. But it stands for something far more valuable, the idea that individuality matters even in the face of conformity. So, here's the lesson I'll leave you with. Don't let anyone, whether it's an HOA, Karen, a boss, or even a neighbor with a clipboard, convince you that blending in is the only option. Sometimes the boldest, brightest act of rebellion is exactly what's needed to remind people that freedom is worth protecting. And now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Have you ever faced an HOA nightmare? How would you fight back? And don't forget to subscribe, because around here the stories just keep getting brighter.